Shishi points at the moon, a commentary. The master was enjoying the moonlight one evening with Yang Shan, when Yang Shan asked, "When this moon is pointed, where does its full round form go to? Again, when it is round, where do the points go to?" The master replied, "When pointed, the round form is hidden. When fully round, the points are also present." So this is an extract from this week's. An extract of this week's Records of the Transmission from Volume 4, translated by Randolph Whitfield. And we've met Master Shishi already in previous extracts and podcasts, and also Yang Shan too. So this is just a continue on of their exchange, and this time it's involving the moon. And of course, the moon in Buddhist iconography plays a prominent part. If we look, for example, at tanka paintings, quite often in the upper left and right corner, the sun and the moon appear, and here they represent a number of things. They represent opposites, obviously sun and moon as well, but the moon in particular in both Chinese and Japanese thought represents the awakened heart, or the awakened mind. If we look at the Buddha's parinirvana picture, there he lies on his side, on his right side, in the Sala Grove, and surrounded by all beings who are lamenting his passing. And if we look right at the very top, very often you get that full moon. And the moon is normally shown full, never as a crescent in Chinese and Japanese thought in this way, certainly in that Buddhist connection, because it's that full moon which is reflecting the light from the sun. And we may wonder, why is it that the sun doesn't represent the enlightenment after all? Its light is so much stronger. And this is true, but it's also hot as well. It has great heat behind it. And heat reminds us of the heat of the fires, the passions of greed, hatred, and delusion when we get hot under the collar. And it is those delusions, or to give them their Sanskrit term, the kleshas, which are the obstacles to that awakening anyway. So that hot illumination isn't particularly useful for seeing. In fact, it obstructs it. And also the light itself has a different quality that comes from the moon and comes from the sun. From the sun, the light being very strong and intense, on a clear day, obviously, what it illuminates is very stark. You get very clear delineations between areas of the earth that are illumined and those that are in shadow. And obviously light and dark are another duality, another pair of opposites. And the Buddha's enlightenment is something that transcends dual vision, that duality. It's non-dual or adual. And the light of the moon, which is a softer light, has those distinctions are not so clear. There are still light and shadow, but the distinctions sort of merge, and there's a sort of fuzziness about it, and that nicely symbolizes that sense of interconnectedness that really shows itself nicely in that classic Chinese symbol of the yin yang, the black fish with the white eye and the white fish with the black eye, and that the yin yang, the black and the white fish, are always conjoined, they're always seen together. And this is something that also reflects strongly in Buddhism as well, that the opposites are not denied as such, and certainly in Mahayana Buddhism, of which Zen is a school, those opposites are made very much of. For example, koans of the six patriarchs, such as before thinking of good and bad being another pair of opposites. Before thinking of good and bad, what is the true face? Before father and mother were born. So it's not denying those opposites, but it's looking through them, looking beyond them. or being able to do that. And there are plenty of such examples as well, to do with high and low, and mountains and marketplaces, and past and future, and stopping and going, and all these sorts of things. These are all pairs of opposites that are used because, and they are all founded on that basic opposition of I and other. This is the delusion of I, which sees itself as one agent, and everything else as something else either to be worked upon, or that I suffer from, but something that's separate from me. And it's that basic separation that from which springs all the other judgments on all the other opposites as well. This is how it hangs together. So that yin yang symbol, always together, that one depends on the other. And interestingly as well, and it's been mentioned in other podcasts, the sixth patriarch, Huineng, famously in his own platform sutra, at the very end, there's a chapter on advice to his senior students who are setting out on their own teaching careers. And the first bit of advice he gives them, he says, if somebody asks you a question about the light, reply to them in terms of darkness. And the reason for doing this is to point out that the two that every pair of opposites are dependent, are codependent, that you cannot have a realization of light without standing in relation to that darkness as well. And the same, you cannot have up without a down. You cannot have long without a short. In other words, every state of identity always stands in comparison with another. I stand in comparison to you. For example, the speaker stands in comparison to the hearer. Um, I suppose it goes back to that old adage. If a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it actually make a sound? If there's no one to actually hear a sound, because sound relies on being heard to be identified as a sound. Sound is a label, a conventional label that we apply to it. And again, Mahayana Buddhism, both from Indian Mahayana right the way through into the Zen schools as well, makes much of this. And many of these discourses make much of that codependency, always getting away from this sense of I, which is so very strong in us and so very strong for the practice. And in fact, just on that subject of practice, because this is important for us as Buddhist practitioners, again, I have that very deep ingrained attitude that I do meditation and that I do a mindfulness practice, I do a daily life practice, and instead we try and get away from that, and instead of saying I do, I give myself into the practice. In other words, the practice is seen as a vehicle, a great vehicle that actually carries us and allows us to travel towards that realization of that which is symbolized by that full moon, because I cannot do it. If I am blind anyway, if I'm struck down by false views and incorrect seeing, then I need to place my trust in a vehicle that will take me where it's necessary to go, take me on that journey, on that path, on that way. And so that the practice itself is something that we give ourselves to, and the practice delivers us. So it's not, I sit down and sit meditation and I immediately get up and start judging my performance. And all that is I-based, all of it. All those thoughts are I-based, and so they can safely be laid down because they have absolutely no relevance to what the Buddha was teaching or what the Buddha was talking about. Those are getting in the way, particularly as they affect motivation as well. The important thing is that we actually did it. We actually went and took the time to sit down, and we made that offering of ourselves into the vehicle of the Buddha Dharma. And that's what's important. Over time, that accumulates. Over time, that makes a difference. Not I makes the difference, but the vehicle itself, the practice itself makes that difference. So there is that sense of intercession in the practice which is obviously necessary if I don't know the way home, and the practice does. So coming back to now our understanding of the moon, having talked a little bit about those opposites, we can begin to look at what this short passage is actually saying. The Master Shishi, was enjoying the moonlight. Lovely. Who doesn't? I mean, the sight of the moon is a splendid thing. And actually, just on that point as well, the appreciation of the natural world is something that is very important in practice. You know, we can concentrate a lot on things like sessions, you know, retreats and zazen, and you know, we think we have to be working on koans and so forth, and obviously all these things are part of the practice, but it can become very insular, very turned inwards in that way, and we need to be careful about that. We also need to be able to turn out and reconnect with the world outside, because there is that interconnectedness. Remember, you know, that yin yang, the black and the white are interconnected. Well, also in that, although to our consciousness presently, our afflicted consciousness, there appears to be a sort of in here and an out there, and we see the two as sort of separate. What the Buddha is saying, and what the Buddha Dharma is saying, is that fundamentally they are as interconnected as everything else. There is no actual separation between consciousness, for example, and the physical world. They are codependent, and indeed they are codependent. The 18 Dhatu, if we look at that, that very clear teaching, which the Buddha said is the all, Buddhistically speaking, they are interdependent. They are codependent as well. But most likely not as I imagine it to be. However, so that ability to look outwards into the world, and to get that sense of the world, and this is how we realize that interconnectedness. You know, we look up at the fullness of the moon on a clear night, and it strikes us. You know, that comes in. Of course, I make all sorts of pictures out of it, but if the heart is a little bit empty, if the heart is a little bit quiet, there is a real sense of presence in that moment. Of course, we're not saying that that presence is on the moon or that it's in here. It's just present. There's no need to try and locate it or discourse about it, but just to allow it, really, just to open up to it and be familiar with it. And so it is as well, that reconnection with nature, with beauty, with that sense of harmony as well, that there really is a sort of harmony that is intuited throughout the world. And this is partly comes to us through our aesthetic sense as well. Again, why the arts are often very important in Zen. They're used because they are expressions of the heart, but they often use the natural world around us, like the cherry blossom or the persimmons or the sparrows or the mountain or the moon, whatever it might be, or people or the tiger, and so on. There's some wonderful sort of brush paintings and calligraphy. Very simple, but very striking and effective, and the lines have a great life that comes out of the heart, but often expressing that the forms of the natural world themselves. And there's a sense when we behold these things, there's a real sense of presence about them, whether in a painting or actually out in the wild, and it can make a big difference. I mean, going for a walk in the country, or even going for a walk through a city or through a town as well, but really just opening up to it. After all, why do we have to say that a bird's nest and an anthill is natural, but a skyscraper isn't? Again, these are dichotomies that we place on them, but you know. Everything that human beings build comes out of the human heart. So where does the human heart come from? On what basis does it stand? You know, we come from the oceans just as much as the birds and the ants as well. So, or from that primordial ocean as well. And this is the problem when we are always separating I out from the environment. We lose contact with, particularly with our past, with our lineage, which where we came from. And this has a special term in Mahayana Buddhism called a gotra. spelt Gotra, but pronounced Gotra. And Gotra represents our karmic lineage. It's where we came from. Now, however we want to interpret karma, it is that sense that again of interdependence, which is really the fundamental thing. The great Indian philosopher Nagarjuna, who founded the Madhyamaka school and who formulated the teaching on shunyata, on emptiness, used that, made it very clear that because everything is subject to this process of cause and effect and coming to be and ceasing to be, that therefore everything is empty as well. That is the basis for shunyata, or at least the logical one. And to be aware of that, to be aware that our bodies, our hearts, our minds are part of that interconnectedness, a part of that codependency, a part of that dependent origination, also takes us a little bit away from that usual center of gravity that I am, where I am the king of the castle, and everything flows from me as the prime agent and the prime mover, really. And this story, or this example really, about the pointed and the round moon, is, although it may not necessarily seem like it in the first instance, actually is pointing to this. It's pointing to this relationship between how things appear and their true nature, what is called the interplay between appearance and reality, which again is very important, that neither of them become obscured. The tendency for I is to take sides of one against the other. Either something is real or it's not real, for example. And there's no sort of middle ground. There's no middle way in this. And of course, this is what this discourse is about. As we should be familiar by now, in these sorts of things, the moon is never just the moon. And so when Yangshan asks, when this moon is pointed, meaning when it's a crescent moon, and we have the 2 points, where does its full round form go to? Again, when it is round, where do the points go to? And the master replied, when pointed, the round form is hidden. Okay, obviously, if we're looking at a new moon, for example, you can see a very thin sliver is illuminated, but if you look carefully, you can also see the round form. Usually, it's usually slightly darker compared to the rest of the night sky, but you can see clearly it's there, although maybe not immediately. And when fully round, the points are also present as well. I mean, if you take a picture of the moon, you can draw a crescent moon onto it perfectly, of course. So it's there. And we may say, well, okay, we sort of get this. But actually, this has many sort of ramifications as well. This has many sort of follow-ons as well for us. Just to give another classic example of this sort of thing is to ask, when we blow out a candle, where does the flame go? We tend to sort of say, well, either we can sort of imagine maybe the flame goes to, I don't know, fire heaven or something, where it sits until we apply the match to the candle wick again, and then suddenly it descends onto the earth. Or we may say, well, it's extinguished, it doesn't exist anymore. But actually, Buddhistically speaking, neither of those are entirely true, because if the candle is not lit, then the principle of ignition still exists. Even if the candle is not lit, because the nature of the candle and the air and the ignition all coming together to produce the flame, because the principle of ignition still exists, whether or not a candle is lit or whether or not even candles exist anymore. That principle of ignition is ever present. You could go anywhere in the universe. If you have air, if you have fuel, and if you have flammable fuel, and if you have ignition, and you bring those 3 together, you get it. You get a candle flame. You could take that candle absolutely anywhere. As long as you have the correct conditions, then it comes about. So in other words, that principle extends throughout the universe. Of course, it's not a thing. It's not we. This isn't a sort of sneaky theory of the ether or anything. It's just stating that these principles are universal. They exist throughout everything. Um, so even though it might not appear, actually it's still present. It's just hidden. The principle is still hidden. Now, if we apply that to ourselves and say, well, because we ask a very similar question to the candle question, where do we go when we die? Yeah, it's very similar to the where does the candle flame go when it's extinguished? And the same point still applies as well. So we can see that actually this question about the moon and whether the fullness and the points, the appearance of it, what happens to that appearance, because the appearance is always changing. And this is something else why the moon is such a classic symbol, is because it has that periodicity. The moon is often closely connected with the sense of the tides, for example. It delineates a lunar month, and at one time before we were sort of before it shifted over to a solar calendar, we had the lunar calendar, and that was used to measure time, and it was very regular. It was very dependable in that way. And so the moon shows this time, and the way that we can know time is through change, through impermanence, through the fact that things are coming to be and ceasing to be. It is that changing nature of things that marks time, that makes us aware of the passage of time. Without that, because time is relative, it's not absolute, without those things coming to be and ceasing to be, there would be no time, in effect. And so the moon, seeing the moon change from going through its different phases, from new moon to full to waning moon and back to the new moon, and so on, again in that very regular way, is like a human life, is like the life of everything. And the way we actually see ourselves. And really what Master Shishi is asking, is pointing to, is to become aware that the nature of the moon is ever present. Whenever we look at the moon, whatever phase it is, there's the appearance of it, and we don't deny that. Of course we don't deny it, it is there. But also the behind it, the principle on which the appearance is based, all those appearances, whether new, full, or waning, are there, are always there. And it is the same with us as well. So now we come and begin to see a little bit more what the relevance is for this for our practice, because this now asks us to look at the wheel of life again. Points back to that classic symbol that's present in all Buddhist literature and in all schools, that wheel of life, and in particular those 6 realms, because those 6 realms with their gods fighting demons, their animal realms, the hell realms, the hungry ghosts, and also the human realm as well, we also are aware that from a practice point of view, we can interpret those as the different states that we find ourselves in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year, and also throughout our life, and by extension from life to life to life. We can take it at all those different levels. But for this life and for our purposes, we are interested in those states of consciousness. And we are aware, if we reflect back, if we reflect back to when we woke up this morning and recall the state that we were in, how would we name it? And we don't have to call it a godlike realm, we just name it. And then an hour later, and then an hour after that, and then the following hour, and then take it through up to where we are now. We can see that there are changes. That mood has changed. We are up and we are down. We are alert. We are bored. We are excited. We are hungry. All these different states are coming to be and ceasing to be. And each one I identify with as it comes on. And I see myself as a sort of continuation of something that's, if we like, passes through these states in these situations. But actually, what the Wheel of Life is saying is that uh, uh, there isn't a singleness in this. And this was personally brought home to me by an experience I had as part of the training, which again I've mentioned before. No new stories, I'm afraid. And this was back at the very beginning. One of the training aids that was suggested to us was to create a small, simple timetable to follow throughout the day. Time to get up, time to go to bed, time for zazen, meals, that sort of thing. I mean, for most of us, if we're working, and then that really provides our sort of regular Monday to Friday timetable. Pretty much, we just dot things around there, and obviously to make it all very workable. But the important thing about getting up and going to bed, it was to really develop a discipline that when it was time to do it. And the purpose of the timetable, or one of the purposes of the timetable, is to take away some of that tendency that I have to pick and choose. And the reason that we do that is that brings the fires into consciousness. You know, sooner or later, I don't want to do it. I become reluctant, even though I've set the timetable myself. And that's a fire. That's something, you know, we're interested in, that emotional energy, which we've talked about elsewhere. But for our purposes here, the important thing was that I got stuck on this thing because I'd had a long ingrained habit of that when the alarm went off at 7 o'clock, I would listen to the headlines of the news for 10 minutes and then I would get up. But the practice said that, for the timetable said that when the alarm goes off, get out of bed straight away. Switch the alarm off, get out of bed. And, you know, first couple of days, that was fine. But then after 4 or 5 days, I suddenly found that I was switching the radio on and listening to those headlines again. And then after a little while, you know, it becomes obvious that I'm avoiding following the timetable instructions, even though I want to do this practice. And so I try to go back to it. And the thing that's surprising is that when I woke up in the morning, I didn't give a damn. I was going to listen to those headlines, you know, this sort of Japanese stuff. You know, I'm a European. I make my own mind up about what I'm going to do. Well, of course, the truth is I'd made my mind up to do the practice. And this was the conflict. This was where two wishes were now in opposition to each other. One was the wish to do the practice, which represented the aspiration to follow the Buddha's way. And the other one was that first thing in the morning, you know, this habit comes up where I like to listen to the radio, and I damn well I'm going to do it. And it was that damn well I'm going to do it, which of course was the passion side, the one where I stick my hooves in and say I will not do it. And then afterwards I regretted it and think, you know, blast. And it got to the point where, you know, in the evening I would make a firm vow. When that alarm goes off, I will get up in the morning. 7 o'clock would come and I would still stick the radio on. And you know, it's not a major thing. You know, I mean, you know, it's not a major crime against humanity to listen to the radio for 10 minutes and get up a little bit later than planned. But that's not the point. That wasn't the point of it. Although interestingly, it brings up all that sort of moral sort of craziness that we walk around with, all my judgments of my performance and whether I'm good and whether I'm bad, and you know, whether I'm worthy and whether I'm not worthy. I mean, and it all gets loaded onto something that frankly it has nothing to do with. But this is all the baggage that we sort of come. It's sort of karmic baggage, if you like, and that's great because once we see all that, we can do something about it. We can begin to see what it is, look into it, and that's obviously part of it too. But the other thing that came crashing in, the insight that really struck me one day, because I couldn't fathom out why was this so difficult. And we've all been there, you know, when we set our minds to do something and yet we self-sabotage in some way. You know, why do we do that? And it finally came crashing in that the person who made the vow before he goes to bed and the person who woke up in the morning and switched on the radio was not the same. And that illusion of a continuous self was precisely that, an illusion. And this is what those 6 states are pointing to. Now, no, are actually pointing to. But there's something else as well, because now we have to ask, well, if this continuity of self is and this separateness of self from the states that it experiences is an illusion, and that's what this was showing, then what am I really? What is the reality of this situation? And of course, this is precisely where the investigation needs to go. These clues are everywhere in our lives, and it's important to reflect on them, to reflect on these things when things start going wrong in this way, when the passions flare up in such a way, not to just sort of ignore them or get carried away by them or start criticizing myself for them, but to really look long and hard and to see what these things are pointing to. And if we have a good foundation in the teachings that the Buddha gave us, that gives us a framework, a lens through which to see this material. So quite a lot in there, and really there's plenty more that could be said about this, but I think for the time being that's probably enough for our purposes, so we'll leave it there. Boji Soaka Hanya Shin